What's up, guys? Thanks so much for joining me in today's video. Today, I want to dive into all of the large Natasha Denona palettes that I have. I have all of these with the smaller pans in them, as well as almost all of the palettes with the larger pans in them. And so I wanted to kind of rank them. Not really. I'm going to talk about what I would recommend, the palettes that I'm just kind of like meh over, and then I actually have some palettes that I would not recommend getting from Natasha. This might be polarizing, but we're going to do it anyway. I'm going to talk about the palettes that I wouldn't maybe repurchase again if I had the chance. So let's go ahead and dive in. Let's start off on a high and talk about the palettes that I really, really love. Actually, before we get into it, just a reminder, this is my opinion, what I look for in an eyeshadow palette and what I look for in Natasha Denona's formula and her variety of eyeshadows. People can get a little in their feelings, a little defensive, especially when it comes to Natasha Denona. I think it's a brand that a lot of people have lots of passion and enthusiasm around. And so I just want to share a reminder that these are my opinions. I'm not at all saying that if we disagree, you are wrong and it's because you don't know anything about makeup. So please don't comment on my videos saying the same thing, because it has happened on some of my reviews of Natasha Denona palettes. If I don't like them, lots of people have expressed that it might be because I am not smart enough to like them. And we don't need that kind of energy here. Okay, let's keep it fun. Let's keep it friendly. It is makeup. Let's dive in. Okay, now first up, I love the Love palette. This is a palette for anyone who just absolutely loves pinks and purples. And this is going to be a common theme throughout. I have a feeling my commentary on all these palettes, and I've said this before in other videos. One of the biggest things I look for in palettes is variety. A variety of textures, of tones and shades, lots of contrast. Like if a palette has too many shadows that are similar, especially in palettes of these sizes where there are so many different shades to fill in a palette like this, if there are too many that look the same, I feel like I get a lot of similar looking eyeshadow looks. And it's not a bad thing, but why didn't we just condense the palette down to like a 5-pan or a 10-pan palette? You know what I'm saying? So when I have a palette that is this size with this many shadows in it, I really like to get most bang for my buck and see a lot of different tones and textures, effects, finishes, all that kind of stuff. And so this really checks that box for me. There's a great variety everywhere from pinks, reds, purples, different shades of purples, silvers, warm colors, cool colors even in here. We'll see a lot of palettes where it's like predominantly warm or cool. This has a mixture of both. And so while I understand like bright red and bright purple might not be everyone's cup of tea, if it is, and this is an appealing color story to you, I really like it. And if you are into a more subdued color story, this next one will be for you, I promise. It's the newest palette to her, I think the newest larger palette that Natasha Denona has come out with. It's the Retro palette, and I have a whole video where I review and swatch this as well as do a couple of different eyeshadow looks if you want to go check that out. But I really like this. It is a cool purpley mauve tone palette, entirely purple, so if like reds and pinks aren't your thing, this will likely be pretty nice for you. And again, you get this, for me, is a kind of comfort zone, cool taupey mauves palette, but you still get the variety in here. I don't feel like there are really any wasted shades. These two here, kind of duplicates. Like I do find them occasionally interchangeable, and so it's not ideal. I might go into a different palette and like these are magnetic, so you can pop one out and, you know, as long as the eyeshadow size matches, pop something from another palette back in here. I might make that swap just to really amp up the contrast, but besides that, I can't complain too much about the variety that is given in here in both color and texture and finish. This appears like this really cool lilac-y gold duochrome. So I really like this palette as well. Next up is the Zendo palette. And this is one that, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like didn't get a whole lot of love when it came out. Not attention-wise. I mean, like when people tried this, they didn't really like it all that much. But I really like this color story. You have warms. Yes, they are kind of predictable, I think. I mean, you got peaches, warm caramels and camels and golds and that kind of stuff. But then this contrast over here with the cooler greens and like this mint green over here, this breath, which is her cream powder formula, which I absolutely love. This whole side just makes like a really interesting section of this palette that contrasts with the warmer reds over here. So I really like this. And again, you get a bunch of fun textures. There is one duochrome down here. Yeah, it's almost like a trichrome called Yama. It's like a peachy, it's a marriage between these two sides, right? It has a peachy base, but then has like a green shifty shimmer to it. And it's really fun, really interesting. And like I said, I think it just kind of brings some cohesion to these two kind of polar opposite sides. So I really like the Zendo palette. Then this is for all the color lovers out there, and it's what I'm wearing on my eyes today. It is the Circo Loco palette. And this is such, if you find that you have a ton of neutrals, flesh tones in your collection, this is like the perfect complement to that. You want a bright, well done pop of color, whether it is matte or shimmer on the lids. This to me, I mean, I'm wearing everything on my lids is from this today. I didn't dip into any supplementary palettes, but if you maybe don't like to wear a look this colorful on a day-to-day basis, this is a really fun palette to keep on as your pop of color to go along with all of your other more everyday wearable sort of palettes. I love it for the color variety, right? There's a little bit of something for everyone. Oranges, blues, purples, teals. There's really nothing that it doesn't have color-wise, but the thing that really got me on this palette is the formulas. They're this fun to mime right here, again, is that cream to powder formula, and there are a couple of those in here. I think this Acrobat up here is, those are two that I'm wearing on my lids today. Those are the cream to powder formula, and then the metallics in here. I mean, Natasha Denona does a great metallic and glittery sort of shade. These are no exception, and they are so pigmented and so rich and smooth, and going with a brush or a finger, and they are beautiful on the lids. This wins in both color and formula for me, even though just because it is so bold and out there, it might not be everyone's cup of tea. I still think it is a great, colorful complement to anything else you might have going on in your collection. Okay, last up for loves is an honorable mention because it is no longer available, but I refuse to throw it away because it is one of my favorite eyeshadow palettes ever. And this is also kind of a plea for Natasha Denona to bring this eyeshadow palette back, because why did you discontinue it? It's the gold palette. First of all, love this highly metallic packaging. I actually really liked this kind of packaging from her, where it's like cardboard and it has like some puffy stuff that the eyeshadows themselves sit in. I didn't mind it so much. And then inside, yes, there are some repeat shades in here. I will say I'm kind of breaking my own rules in that there a few of these are like, ooh, very similar to each other, kind of interchangeable. Would have liked to see more variety. But what she did so well in this palette were the creamy, metallic, shimmery shades, the duochrome shades. And again, this seems to be a theme that she does in her palettes that sort of marry a lot of different contrasting shades. She creates multi-chrome shadows that are both sides in one. So like here, you have, warm browns and golds as well as teals. And so shades like this one up here and this one down here are like a golden base with then a reddy teal shift to it. Or this one down here that's like a greeny gold base with then a sandy mauvey brown shift to it. And it just, or even this one. This is the teal that has a gold shimmer to it. So she just marries it all together so well. And they not only add a fun effect to the top of any of these sort of safer or maybe more wearable shades over here, but they just bring so much cohesion to the palette. Why, Natasha Denona, did you discontinue this? Please bring it back. Please bring it back, but with the cream powder formulas, if you could. That would be amazing. Thank you so much. Okay, now let's talk about the Just So palettes. These aren't absolute loves for me, but they also aren't, I wouldn't not buy them again, but I'm not as enthusiastic about these as I am about those that I just mentioned. First up is the Sunset palette, and this, here's the thing, at face value, this is gorgeous. If you are into warm toned eyeshadows, both browns and oranges, you get yellow and red in here. This is a gorgeous palette. Again, I don't hate it, but as far as both formula and texture, I wish there was a little bit more going on in here. There is no cream to powder formula, which I think this came out before she started doing that in her palette, so if she were to update it, I would love to see more of that formula in here, especially for these matte shades like this yellow one. Yellows are kind of hard to do. This one, when you layer it up, it works just fine. But like, if you can do it, or this red one in that creamy powder formula, oh my gosh, this would be a real winner. And then I feel like there was an opportunity for a stronger duochrome shade, like a stronger effect shade. There's no glitter in here. There's no multi-chromatic shadow in here. And I think we can all agree that is something that Natasha Denona does really, really well, are those pretty effect shades. I mean, she does all of her finishes very, very well, but those especially kind of, Natasha Denona is like Pat McGrath in my mind in that way, in that so many of her palettes bring us color stories that we've seen from other brands, but her effect shades are truly stand out amongst all brands ever, period. And so I really would have loved to see more of those in this palette. The Sunrise palette, again, super pretty and a color palette that would otherwise very much appeal to me. However, I felt like there were more repeats than usual in here. These three reddish berry shades, very, very similar when worn. And then this whole neutral column right here, and in fact, getting even into these over here, also kind of repeats. Not identical by any means. You'll see in the swatches they do very much look different, but as far as like how they actually look and wear on the lid, I found them to be very, very similar and oftentimes interchangeable, to the point where they create the same look. Like, I'm not getting any new or different look in using one of these versus the other. So this one, again, beautiful color story. It just had too many repeat shades in there for me. And last up for the Just So So's is the Star palette. And this one kind of took me by surprise because this was actually the very first Natasha Denona eyeshadow palette I ever bought. So I feel like it should hold more of a special place in my heart, especially over the gold palette. But this, I just feel like her color stories have gotten more complex and interesting as she went on from this. So on this side, you have your neutrals, your flesh tones, browns, golds, as well as a duochrome. It's kind of like the classic matte club, right? It's like a brown with a blue-red shift to it, which ties it in perfectly to the other side here, which is where you have red, berry, you know, smoky pink and pinky taupes over here. And so that shade kind of helps marry these two, which I do really like. But again, it's just not the most interesting color story I think she has out there anymore. Still very beautiful, and more glittery effect shades. Like this one up here, these are some chunkier shimmer shades in this palette that I have noticed she tends to do less of these days. So it does offer something unique in that way, but this is another one that I'd really love to see her redo with those cream to powder shades. However, explain to me why this is still available. This is not much, but a little bit older than the gold palette, and yet the gold palette is discontinued. Why? Okay, we're done with the gold palette, moving on from the gold palette. Let's talk about the palettes that I don't love, that I wouldn't necessarily recommend. Again, if you love them, that's fine. I could see why people would love them. I just personally don't, and let me tell you why. First up is the bronze palette. This, it really is all about the duplication for me. There's just a lot of similar shades in this palette. It gets very monochrome. There are pops of like this purple, or, you know, this duochromatic pinky green in this bliss shade down here. Kind of deep in the crimson berries over here, but for the most part, it's very similar. It's a very, very pretty palette. It just creates a lot of the same looks for me, no matter which shadows that I am wearing. The exact same reasoning is why the Glam palette is not for me. And this is the one where when I said that in my review of this palette, I have a separate video for this palette, not a lot of people agreed with me, and that's okay. But this was another palette where I just felt like I could use, you know, pick any number of like any of these shades, use them interchangeably. The look would be identical, really, no matter which shade that I used. And if you love those shades, this is absolutely the palette. Like, if you know that you're going to run out of one of these shades because it's going to be a go-to for you, then having multiples that look the same is going to be ideal. That's just not how I like to wear my eyeshadow palettes. So these are not my favorite. And then what is probably the most controversial one for me. This almost ended up in the meh pile, but I took a stance and I'm sticking with it. The Trichrome palette. Now, if you know me, you know I love a trichrome. I love multichromatic shadows. I just think it looks like you put so much more work. I mean, not only are they visually mesmerizing, they're like eye candy, but it looks like you put so much more work into your eye look than you actually did, right? Swipe one shadow across your lid, looks like you have 3 on your lid depending on the light you're in. Yeah, absolutely, yes please. However, for something that's called a Trichrome palette, of the 15 shades that are in here, only 3 of them are trichromes. I mean, I would have loved to see, I understand that it's not all trichromes, but 3 out of 15? That's just, it's not ideal to me. Don't get me wrong, the trichromes in this palette are gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. And they tell such an interesting and beautiful color story in the rows they're in. You can see, you know, with this top one, it's a green situation. And then here it's a mauvey purple. And then the bottom, it's like a purple, but also warm peach kind of thing. And between, and this bottom row, like kind of marries the green and the middle purple row together. Like I get it, but it's not a trichrome palette, especially when in every other palette that I've showed you, there are easily more than 3 sort of effects shades, metallic, glitter, multi-chromatic shades in the whole palette. And so for the one that's called Trichrome to only have 3, I was just like, I want to love it, but I want so much more out of a palette like this. So it's beautiful, yes, but if you're thinking you're going to open this up and it's going to be just full of multi-chromatic eyeshadows, that's not what you get. Then there is the Biba palette. And again, I've actually worn this alone quite a few times as far as the formulas go. It's beautiful. It truly is a classic flesh tone, you know, browns, neutrals, great everyday sort of eyeshadow palette. So I can see where as a brand, she would want a palette like this to complement the rest of her eyeshadow palette collection. But this is something that I feel like a lot of other brands have done, can do really well. So if I'm gonna go for a Natasha Denona palette, it's gonna be one where I get bold colors that I know she does well, her infamous textures that I know she just knocks out of the park, not a naked palette, right? Like a nudes, natural tones, natural textures, because the shimmers in here aren't even like the metallic shimmers. They are like classic satin, sort of beautiful, but just kind of like whispers of a shimmer compared to some of her other really high shine shades. So that is why the Biba palette is a no from me. And if you like other palette roundup videos like this, I have a few others where I've done like the Pat McGrath Mothership palettes, some Viseart palettes. So if you like these videos or you just want to disagree with me more over which palettes I like and you don't like, or vice versa, you can go check those out right here. There's this video, I'll link them down in the description box below, and I'd love to hear from you guys. Which Natasha Denona palettes are your favorite? Tell us all down in the comment section below. Looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye guys.